Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. In just a few minutes, we will spend some time talking about the Singapore summit and the agreement signed between North Korea and the United States. But before we do so, I wanted to bring somebody to the microphone, because this has been a week in which we've spent some time kind of looking at the issue of school safety. We know Governor Abbott unveiled his plan to address school safety, which had about 40 different points. Last week, we talked with Senator Don Huffines, who yesterday was down in Austin because he was part of a select committee put together by the Lieutenant Governor, Dan Patrick, to look at those issues. But as they talk about everything from school architecture to arming students or teachers or anything that they might want to get into, I always want to say, can we go back and look at some individuals that have been doing some of these things for some long period of time, if for no other reason to set aside some of the what-if questions that we always hear? So I thought it would be good to bring David Thwaite on, because he is an individual that actually has been serving for 15 years as the superintendent of the Herald ISD. He is a graduate of Hardin-Simmons University, has a Master's of Education from Texas State University. Also was an individual that worked with the Texas Senate to pass Senate Bill 1857, which created the school safety certification. And this is something I thought would be helpful. Posted an article that you can read about, talking about the fact that his was the first school district to begin to arm teachers. Now we have about 170 other school districts that have done so. And David, thank you for giving us a few minutes today of your time.
Good. I'm glad to be here.
One of the things that I think people will notice if they've ever seen you on television, I know NBC did an interview with you recently, I think we can even post that if people would like to see it, is you get all of those kinds of questions. What about, what about, what about? I'm sure that now, almost 10 years into this, you're getting a little tired of those kinds of questions, because if nothing else, you've got a 10-year experiment to show that all these things that people were fearful would happen actually did not happen, right?
Right. It's the same kind of questions we got before any of the concealed handgun license policies were passed across the nation. There were prophecies that there would be, killing in the street. People would get into a fender bender and then, and shoot each other and all this kind of craziness. And I think it's just fascinating that the minute you start talking about giving people handguns or a way to protect themselves, they immediately think that these people are going to turn into monsters. So it's one of those fantasies, I guess, by the liberal left.
Well, again, there's always this kind of assumption, if you've not been around firearms, to see them as inherently dangerous, and they can be in the wrong hands, but they are tools, as you've said so often. And I think one of the problems is that people that have never even thought about the fact that a school could be something other than a gun-free zone just can't get their head around it. And when I've either read about interviews that people have done with you or watched, for example, I mentioned the NBC interview, you just get the sense that it's like we're from two different countries so much, because they can't even imagine that you would allow even somebody who has a concealed carry license or somebody who's had military experience to actually have a handgun in a school, because they just cannot even begin to change the paradigm that they've been working with, wouldn't you say?
Well, yeah, but not just that, but the paradigm was already there. I mean, they accused us of thinking outside the box, but I really was kind of in the box because in the status quo before I passed the policy in October of '07, we had security guards and armed people in our schools.
Sure.
But what's fascinating is I think that just because you have a badge, then that changes it. But the data is kind of interesting surrounding this, and I think there have been a couple of studies out. The most recent one is the same as the previous, and that is that concealed handgun licensees across the nation have a lower crime rate than law enforcement. And that's something that's hard for people to get their head around. And so because you have to kind of be squeaky clean in order to get these concealed handgun licenses. And on top of that, you're talking about some good people who have some good judgment. So if you're given a gun, and even in a school setting that's concealed, that is outside the box, but it's better than the box because these aren't in the open. They're not in open holsters. They're concealed, and so it's out of sight and out of mind for our kids.
Well, and let me give you a little bit more props in that regard, because we've had John Lott on this program many times before, the war against guns and all sorts of research that he's done. Yeah. And again, that's exactly the kind of research that they found, that those particular localities where there is a concealed carry license, the crime rate goes down. Because just think about it this way. If you're a burglar and you go up and down the street, maybe even there in Harold or in Dallas or wherever you might happen to be, and you're not sure who might have a gun and who might not have a gun, you're going to be a little more hesitant to break into a home or to mug somebody or something of that nature. And that, to me, I think is the really powerful argument that seems to be missing from people that have been asking you tough questions. You don't necessarily ever have to use a gun. No, do you even have to show that you have one? Just the fact that any evildoer knows that if they go to a school in the Harold Independent School District, they may be confronted with a weapon, causes them to think twice about whether they would enter into one of those schools, don't you think?
Yeah, and historically, you're turning basically a soft target into a hard target, which is created by failed policy and the gun-free zones type thing. But I don't know. There's several quotes throughout history. One of them, Caesar, if you want peace, prepare for war. You know, you've got Teddy Roosevelt, speak softly, carry a big stick. These are same philosophies across the nation, or across the world, and around time and across ages, that if you are prepared to defend yourself, that will prevent someone from attacking you.
So again, one issue is deterrence. We just talked about that. The other is, well, what happens if indeed there is a shooter? And of course, one of the articles I've posted here is from the Texas Tribune, so they can see who you are and see a little bit about that. But then it's all saying, well, this happened so quickly, we may not be able to react. And that's where I think the latest FBI report that's come out, and we documented this in one of my commentaries, shows that this image that is created of somebody who is in a panic spraying bullets into an innocent crowd is not verified by the kind of evidence that we have, that the best way to stop a bad guy with a gun in a school is a good guy with a gun. And that good guy either is law enforcement, or in a number of cases, it's been a good guy who's not law enforcement, but somebody has concealed carry. So this idea that they would go crazy, they would hit innocent bystanders, so far hasn't happened. And just one more piece of evidence that whether you look at deterrence or what actually happens when an individual is forced to draw their weapon, we have pretty good evidence now over the last few years in which we've actually held some of those records.
Yeah, and the way that I answer that, there's several aspects of my plan that are strong, and that's one of the elements. And it kind of goes like this. It was one of the first questions that they tried. The left tries to aim at. I first got it on an ABC interview over 10 years ago, and the question goes something like this: well, police officers miss 75% of the time, and I think actually in Texas it's more like 81% of the time. And the important aspect behind that data is simple, that that's all shots fired by police officers. But whenever you look at data for police officers when they're in their own home and defending their own home, or they're at the scene of the crime and getting a big gulp while somebody's getting some kind of robbing a store, then they're acting.
I'll get back in just a minute.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Perhaps you've read Nathaniel Hawthorne's classic novel, The Scarlet Letter. Students who read it today usually react with mockery and ridicule. They wonder how a society could be so prudish and punitive to force Hester Prynne to wear a label of shame for her sin. How unenlightened for society to place public moral condemnation on her. But Dan McLaughlin reminds us in a recent column that the Scarlet Letter is back. Today, we don't require people to wear a scarlet A, but we do shun them and brand them as outcasts if they violate the current standards of political correctness. The example he uses is the plight of a Manhattan lawyer who let fly a racial tirade at Spanish-speaking workers at a restaurant. Unfortunately for him, what he said was filmed and widely disseminated. Apparently, he's been kicked out of his office building, had protesters outside his building, and has already lost at least one client. Perhaps the lawyer deserved all of this negative attention. He apparently has a history of obnoxious behavior. I'm not interested in defending him, but I do want to point out that public shaming for bigotry seems to have become the new Scarlet Letter. He may lose his livelihood over stupid comments captured on an iPhone. It's worth mentioning that the column by Dan McLaughlin was written before the latest controversy surrounding Roseanne Barr and Samantha Bee. Lawyers, comedians, and politicians are subjected to public moral condemnation. Dan McLaughlin wonders how far we should go and how indelibly the stain should endure. Isn't it ironic that the people shunning and shaming today are the same people who tell us not to be morally judgmental? Unfortunately, what they are missing are key biblical categories of sin, repentance, and forgiveness. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
David Thwaites with me for a few more minutes. And again, he is in his 15th year as superintendent of Herald ISD and was the first district to actually arm teachers. And if you got any comments or questions, 1-800-351-1212. Of course, we also broadcast on Facebook Live. You can leave a comment there. And David, you're just pointing out something. Unfortunately, we had one of those mandatory breaks where, yes, indeed, sometimes when police officers in a confrontation where there are all sorts of shots fired, they don't always hit their target. But you were pointing out that if you talk about a police officer or somebody that's had military training or somebody that's had concealed carry training, if they are confronted in their home or their office, that's certainly a different set of circumstances. And so talk about that.
Well, what I was going to say is their accuracy is almost 100%. If they know who the bad guys are and the good guys are, then and they know what's going on and then know the layout of the property, their accuracy is almost 100%. And that's exactly what I'm talking about with the Guardian team. They're at home in the school. They know who the bad actors are, who the good actors are. And so their accuracy then is going to be just like that different data on the shots fired. And so, therefore, you don't have the casualties. Somebody coming in blind and that sort of thing.
Sure.
The other aspect of the Guardian Plan is that you have multiple people throughout the building, and this is something that is not addressed, and I've been addressing the last 5 or 6 years, and that is that you need ears throughout a school. Schools are always big classrooms separated by corridors, and so there's a silencing effect for gunfire. You need to have ears throughout that building, and therefore you can address the problem in seconds and not minutes.
Yes, and again, that's the point. Not everybody has to have a firearm. As a matter of fact, a lot of teachers would not want those. But speak to this issue. I appreciate your patience sometimes when people are asking you questions. And one of the ones that I'm afraid I'd roll my eyes or go, "You kidding me?" when they say, well, aren't you afraid that these teachers would harm the students? And I'm thinking, the reason the teachers are there is because they love their students. But you get that question sometimes, don't you, in interviews?
Yeah, and I think the thing that is a misnomer too is that we're not just talking about teachers. My policy says employees, but that is a crazy thing to think that someone would actually try to hurt a student. You know, and for myself, I've been punched several times by students. The idea of ever hitting them back would not be. It's not even my repertoire. I mean, it's not something we think about. We like kids, and we want to protect them. But we also know what our professional code of conduct should be. And the idea that you have these crazy people that would actually hurt children is nutty. And not just that, but you have to look at the status quo. You don't even have non-professionals, people that have concealed handgun licenses. You don't have them involved in these anger shootouts. And that's what they're accusing teachers of, that they're going to get mad that kid didn't turn his homework in or something and shoot them. Well, that's not happening by non-teachers. So why would it be happening by teachers? What did teachers do to make them mad to cause them to make these accusations? And again, these accusations are not based on data. They're not based on truth.
Well, again, let's for just a minute talk about that, because first of all, this must feel like a deja vu or like the movie Groundhog Day, because you did this almost 10 years ago. And if I remember right, then they were saying, well, you did this to just bother President Obama. Then you had another wave that came after Sandy Hook, and now you're kind of in the third wave of Parkland, aren't you? Have I got that right? Take us through these last 10 years.
Yeah, it's been a crazy situation. Again, we passed our policy in October of 2007, which was well before Obama was even on. I think he was on the stage with everybody else during that election cycle. And when we hit the news in August of 2008, that was something that someone did bring up several times in the media, that we're just doing this to aggravate the Democratic hopeful at that time. And then after he was elected in November, so that was kind of silly, but. It is interesting that they don't like this policy. I mean, here I'm in a small district in the middle of West Texas, and they really do not like the idea that I'm setting back the clock and going back before 1990, and that is interesting. And this is something that John Lott told me. You mentioned John Lott, who's actually the guru on all this data. He's an extremely intelligent person. But prior to 1990, they passed gun-free zones, but there's no data, there's no anecdotal data, there's no police report, there's nothing that said that anybody who was approved to have a gun on school property, and there were a lot of them. I know administrators who had them in their desk, but there wasn't any policy that said they couldn't have them. Nothing bad ever happened with those guns. The only reason we made schools gun-free zones is because of all the gang members and all the drug dealers that were bringing guns to school, but they were breaking the law to start with. So we made a policy so that the bad guys would follow the law, and they don't do that. And all that did was open up our schools to be the killing grounds for those who would come in and hurt them.
Yeah.
Hurt our children, and that's what failed policies do. They create more trouble.
Well, what I think is so interesting is, as you said, why do they care what's happening in Harold, Texas? But more importantly, I think they've even sometimes said, well, who gave you permission to do that? Which I'd love you to respond to that for just a minute, because I always thought that question was kind of interesting, too.
Well, what we did is I was installing passive security, and that was like cameras and magnetic lock doors, limited entry. Yeah. And I was moving through that process, and with the Amish, Pennsylvania shooting took place in rural Pennsylvania. And so I had to answer the question, what am I going to do if somebody's an active shooter in my school? So I ran it across my attorneys and said, hey, is this legal, my plan, on the state and federal level? They gave me the answer in December. We didn't move on it exactly then because, we were going to be the poster child for the liberal media at that point. But we sat on it, and after Virginia Tech, which is in April of 2007, that's what moved. Some of our board members passed. that was our wake-up call.
Yes.
I think we could have prevented that. Yeah.
But I thought it was kind of interesting. Who gave you permission? Well, it's legal, so I just did it. I mean, if you live in this world where you've got to get permission from the President of the United States or from the governor of the state of Texas or something, or you've got to get the ACLU's approval, then you find that. But I just appreciate the understanding that you have that you don't have to go ask for permission when, indeed, that's a Second Amendment right, and there isn't anything that violates any of the laws regarding schools in the state of Texas.
Well, what that becomes is philosophical from a Judeo-Christian experience, and that is that we have free will. Unlike the socialist communist thinking that says that the government has to tell you what you have a right to do, this is our belief in the Constitution that we have free will and we have rights that are endowed by our Creator and not given to us by the government. So we don't have to have permission, and that is something that really they don't understand.
It is.
It's a different way of thinking.
Well, again, I wanted people to read a little bit about this and know more about it. Of course, Governor Abbott has unveiled his 40 different recommendations. There's now select committees looking at these ideas, and some of them have to do with school architecture. Some of them have to do with identifying individuals that might have some level of mental difficulty. Some of them have to do with the securing of various firearms and the rest. But I've always said that if you have any questions about what it might be like to arm employees, both teachers and other staff, all you have to do is go to Herald, Texas, and you get a pretty good idea. And you've been involved, I guess you could say, in a 10-year experiment. It's turned out very well. So I sure appreciate you giving us some time today to educate some of our listeners about what might be the future here in the state of Texas.
Sure. It's been a pleasure.
We're going to take a break, and David Thwaite with us. If you'd like to know more about him, we have that on our website. We have one article. You can also watch the video. And, of course, we will come back to this issue again because a lot of people have been paying attention to some of the recommendations put forward by Governor Abbott and his roundtable. We've talked with members of Congress. We've talked with a state senator. We've talked with some representatives. And so we will continue this conversation and just, again, help you maybe hear some things you don't hear in the mainstream media, because that's what Point of View is all about. We come back, though, I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about this meeting, a historic meeting between the President of the United States and the leader of North Korea. Now, again, it is, I think, really important to recognize that even though they have put together a joint statement, many of the things that are being promised by Kim Jong-un are things that have been promised before and have not been fulfilled. So, again, trust but verify is certainly a mindset that we should have as we think about some of these issues. And so I want you to think a little bit more about what this joint statement might mean. But at the same time, this was historic, and we want to talk about that in terms of its significance. And then I've posted a couple of articles, one in particular, Political Overreaction is the New American Way, and that's one of the articles we've posted. And if you'd like to know a little bit more about what it's like for Christians in North Korea, this piece that goes on for about 4 pages from the stream, I think would be something that would be very helpful as well. So I wanted to post some material. We'll come back and talk about that. And at any point, if you have a comment or a question, you can give us a call or leave a comment on our Facebook Live page. We'll take a break. We have a lot more to cover. We'll do that right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net. Or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Continuing our conversation now, looking at the summit that took place yesterday between the two leaders of North Korea and the United States. Nice to meet you is the way in which Kim Jong-un shook hands with Donald Trump, and this was a historic meeting. So I don't want to overplay it because I recognize that we should be very careful and discerning about whether or not we are being played. But at the same time, I don't want to minimize the fact that this is the first time that the sitting heads of the United States and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea have ever met. And so they sat down for some talks and then were joined by some of their associates. So again, we'll see how that plays out. There were a couple of very important statements that were made, and let me see if I can kind of summarize some of those. Gary Bauer put it this way. He said, point number one, the United States and North Korea will establish new relations in accordance with the desire of the peoples of the two countries for peace and prosperity. Kind of throwaway line, but nevertheless important. Number two, both nations will work towards a lasting and stable peace regime on the Korean Peninsula. Number three, North Korea commits to work towards complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. And number four, both nations commit to recovering POW MIA remains, including the immediate repatriation of those already identified. A lot of people were surprised at that one because they said, let's not take too much time away from the possibility that that would be a deal breaker in terms of trying to remove nuclear weapons. But nevertheless, that's on the document. Now, the optimist would say this is a significant change. It is an opportunity for dialogue, and it was brokered in part by Dennis Rodman. Didn't think I'd ever say that name here, but if you saw the CNN interview the other day with him, he points out that he came back from North Korea and tried to get the attention of the then President of the United States, Barack Obama, who would have nothing to do with him. Now, again, Dennis Rodman has done Dennis Rodman, so okay, I'll play that game with you for a minute as well and recognize that who knows what's in the mind of that individual. But nevertheless, they even talked about the fact that he faced death threats and everything else. And isn't it funny that Dennis Rodman is on with a reality show TV host, and they talk, and this developed in one way or another. So who knows what we've got here, but we'll see what will take place here. Again, some of the observations from our friend Gary Bauer, he said that this whole idea of whether or not the tough rhetoric and the tough talk from Donald Trump would make a difference. He said that, interestingly enough, first of all, since that tough talk and rhetoric of Donald Trump, there have been no nuclear testing by North Korea. Since that tough talk, there have been no missiles flying over Japan. Since that tough rhetoric and talk from Donald Trump, there have been no threats by Kim Jong-un against Guam and Hawaii. And since that tough rhetoric and talk, North Korea shut down its main nuclear test site. And since that tough talk and rhetoric from Donald Trump, we've had 3 U.S. hostages released. So we'll see if this turns out to be nothing more than window dressing or whether or not something more significant will take place. I thought it was intriguing to see how they got together because the two met for 38 minutes on a one-on-one meeting, and they only have really the translators there. Then the top advisors joined them for another 2 hours of talks as well. And as Donald Trump is wont with his hyperbole, said, we're going to have a great discussion. It's my honor, and we'll have a terrific relationship, I have no doubt. Kim Jong-un added that old prejudices and practices worked as obstacles in our way forward, but we overcame all of them, and we are here today. Signing again a joint statement that relates to some of those issues. And according to the agreement now, the United States and North Korea commit to holding follow-up negotiations. You might say, okay, who's going to be involved with those? Well, primarily led by the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, and by a high-level official of North Korea at the earliest possible date to implement the outcomes of the summit. And we'll see where that plays itself out. So, again, that's kind of where we find ourselves right now. But if nothing else, I think it was a significant first step. I don't think you want to play it any more significantly than that. But also, we certainly do not want individuals downplaying what was a historic meeting. Those of us that are a little bit older can remember when there was a chance for Richard Nixon to go to China. That did not even seem like a possibility, and yet I lived during a time in which we were able to open up negotiations with China. Do we still have problems with China? Of course we do. Are we in a better position than we were under the old Cold War? Of course we are. I can remember a time when we began to report here on Point of View that there was some evidence that Russia was going to go bankrupt and that the Berlin Wall might come down, that the Iron Curtain might come down. We talked about that. Now, it's decades ago, but I remember having those conversations around this table, which was in a different studio, by the way. But nevertheless, do we have still problems with Russia? Yes. Are the tensions between the United States and Russia anything like the Cold War? No, they're not. So, again, we'll see where this takes us, and I thought it would be good to reflect for just a few minutes on the summit in Singapore. One of the other articles I've posted here is by David French, and the reason I wanted to do that is because he's talking about what I think has become a way of life, a political overreaction, and he tells one story from, of all things, Texas Monthly, which is why I thought it would be kind of interesting, primarily for our Texas listeners, but even for those of you up in Minnesota listening today on this particular hour of the program, recognize that what we're really talking about here is something that happens in almost every area. And it's an interesting story because you have these girls, they're teenage girls, and they're in line to buy chocolate chip cookies. And one of the girls was wearing a souvenir shirt that she bought in Washington, D.C. that, unfortunately, for some standing around, had the name Donald Trump on it. Well, I won't go into the nasty things this liberal activist woman in line had to say to them, but let's just be honest, it was pretty derisive and yelling. And so as a result, things began to escalate. And, of course, then it hit social media. Well, then the liberal activists thought, maybe I overreacted. You think? And so she decided to actually apologize. She met with the first family and things went pretty well, but then somehow the arrangements for the other families got all messed up. So then the three families decided to file a criminal complaint against her. Oh, or it got out of hand real quickly then, because then the media got involved. The next thing you know, the story was spread around the internet. They, in one interview, actually had to show one of the parents with face in shadow, kind of like you do for a witness protection program. And you can see that what you almost instantaneously have is just an incredible amount of anger and animus that surfaces and then is fueled by social media. And the point he's making is this is kind of life now. He even talks about the fact that they had the neighborhood Facebook page, and you dare not put anything political on the neighborhood Facebook page. I actually belong to a neighborhood HOA page, and the same thing. Don't say anything political, because you know what's going to happen next, that at least one individual or more are going to be really upset. And so then he goes on to talk about something that I thought was kind of interesting, because he talks about a book review by Cass Sunstein, and he's been an individual that I've quoted over the years, and he's reviewing one of these books in which the question is, aren't we kind of like Nazi Germany or becoming like that? And so in his review, he said, if the president of the United States is constantly lying, complaining that the independent press is responsible for fake news, and goes through this long, long list as well, then what you have here is the United States is not seen anything like it before. That's how he ends this long train of sins or accusations against the president. And I have to love David French in his piece, because he said, excuse me? He didn't actually say that, I did, but he's basically saying the same thing, because he says, there's no trail of tears. That would be Andrew Jackson. There's no Woodrow Wilson's act of censorship, which would be blocked by layers of Supreme Court precedent. There's no Franklin Delano Roosevelt's internment camps, which today would be unthinkable. There's no 2 centuries of slavery or a century of servitude, which eventually elects an African-American president to 2 terms. And the point he's saying is that maybe it's time for us to realize, by and large, that we're blessed to live in a time of normal politics with normal stakes,
We've gone more than a decade without a crushing attack like 9/11 or an economic meltdown like the Great Recession. And you would think that we are on the edge of a civil war by looking at the political overreaction to just about everything. Anyway, I posted that article. Thought you might find it interesting. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. $3.25 million. That's the price one New Jersey town will pay for its religious discrimination. Not long ago on this program, I told you about the refusal of Bernards Township, New Jersey, to grant a building permit to the Islamic Society of Basking Ridge, New Jersey. The society fought City Hall for at least 4 years, having their application denied 9 separate times. In November 2016, the U.S. Department of Justice filed a suit against the township, alleging a violation of the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. The Department of Justice won just 2 months later. But by May 2017, the township decided to give up the fight, settle with the government, and allow the Islamic Society to build their mosque. This is good news for religious liberty. Though Bernards Township, in this case, used their zoning laws to prevent the building of a mosque, it could have just as easily been a synagogue, a church, a cathedral, or other house of worship. City governments cannot intentionally throw up permitting obstacles to religious organizations. They must treat a religious organization's application for land use just like it would any other land use application. In a land that values freedom, our government should never make the free exercise of religion difficult. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
More people today are saying Americans don't really need religion, but America does need religion. Religion helps the economy, families, and even national security. Learn more by reading Saving America, 10 Reasons Religious Freedom is the Key to Our Nation's Future. You can download this free booklet at firstliberty.org/Saving America. That's firstliberty.org/Saving America. Discover 10 ways religion benefits America at firstliberty.org/Saving America.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
This program, let me mention that in the next hour, we're going to have Lauren Green McAfee in studio with us, and we're going to be talking about this new book, Only One Life, How a Woman's Everyday Shapes an Eternal Legacy. She's been on with us before. As a matter of fact, a great millennial voice, and we are so thrilled that she can be with us. And for those of you that would like to listen in the third hour, it does not broadcast on the local stations, but certainly on our national program, we'll have Mike Maden in studio. First of all, if you like the Tom Clancy novels, he's carried on that tradition, but we're also going to be talking about drone warfare and the ethics of drone warfare and some of that. So we've got a lot to cover, and I'm looking forward to that as well. As I mentioned just a minute ago, we've posted this piece by our friend David French, Political Overreaction is the New American Way, and it relates a little bit to my commentary today. My commentary today is called Scarlet Letter. Now, if you have not heard the commentary, let me give you just a little bit of an overview, and you can go to the website, pointofview.net, go to the Viewpoint section, and you can not only listen to it or watch it, but you can also sign up to have each one of my commentaries arrive in your inbox Monday through Friday.
And Penedexter does a weekly commentary. We put that in your inbox on Saturday. It's free of charge, and it's a way to give you some more information, sometimes some facts and figures, some statistics, some things we've covered on the program, other things we don't cover on the program. And this one is titled Scarlet Letter, because I use the idea of Nathaniel Hawthorne's novel, The Scarlet Letter. And if you might remember, the story, of course, was Hester Prynne, who was supposed to wear a scarlet A because, indeed, she was an individual who was labeled as a sinner. And as I point out, students who read it today, they just can't even imagine this. I mean, they react with mockery and ridicule, assuming they're even allowed to read it. And those books sometimes don't even show up on the reading list anymore in many of the middle school and high school classrooms. But if they do, they just can't even imagine how a society would be so prudish and so punitive to force Hester Prynne to wear a label like that. Well, guess what? Dan McLaughlin, in a recent column, said the Scarlet Letter is back. And no, we're not asking somebody to wear a scarlet letter A, but we do shun them and brand them as outcast if they violate the current standards of political correctness. And this is where you again see this political overreaction. He uses one example of a Manhattan lawyer, and he let fly a racial tirade against some Spanish-speaking workers at a restaurant in Manhattan. That was inappropriate. It was uncalled for. It, frankly, from what I've been able to determine, is something he's known for. He's got a bit of a temper. But what happened next is even, in some respects, more significant, because he was filmed, and then the video was widely disseminated. What happens next in social media is he was kicked out of his office building. Even while he was there, he had protesters outside of his building, and he, at the time when I read this, had already lost one client because of some stupid thing he said that was recorded on an iPhone. Now, I'm not interested in defending him. He has a history of obnoxious behavior, probably deserved a little of that. But you have to ask a question: at what point can public shaming go too far? And that's where Don McLaughlin was asking the question: how far should we go, and how indelible should this stain be? Now, the interesting part about this is the reason I used it is the column was written by Don McLaughlin before the latest controversies with Roseanne Barr and Samantha Bee. And in some respects, it, I think, just made the case. Roseanne Barr said a pretty stupid thing on Twitter. We all agree with that. It's uncalled for. It was, but she loses a show, and everybody on the show with her loses as well. Samantha Bee, you go down this long list, and I, can certainly make a list, and you can as well. We're talking about lawyers in this case, politicians, comedians, all sorts of individuals that have been shunned and shamed. And as a result, even if they apologize, even if they see the error of their ways, even if they say, as they are wont to sometimes say, that wasn't me. Well, yes, it was, but it was you in a bad set of circumstances. There's almost no place for repentance. And so that's why I end my commentary by saying, what's missing from this kind of shaming today is the biblical categories of sin, repentance, and forgiveness. There's a point at which somebody might say something or do something. They are deeply sorry for it, have learned their lesson, and plan to do the rest of their life to make up for it. We should, somewhere along the line, be a more forgiving society. And, of course, with social media, forgiveness is hard to find. And so it is kind of interesting that both my commentary that landed today and the article that I posted by David French sort of reinforce each other as well. And so just before we take a break, let me just mention that we have focused some of our time and attention today on North Korea. And there's a couple of other resources I would like to put in your hands. First of all, if you go to our videos, one that is not up there at the moment, but you can go through the video selection, was about the lights of North Korea. Because, of course, if you've ever seen a satellite photograph of North Korea and South Korea, you see South Korea all lit up, and you see North Korea in darkness. Well, not only is there physical darkness because of the poverty of North Korea and because of the communist brutal rule, but there's spiritual darkness as well. And so the other resource I wanted to make available to you is our second article that we've posted entitled North Korea and the Summit. And this comes from our friends at Open Doors, and in particular, is, I think, just an outstanding interview with Vernon Brewer, who actually has been serving in North Korea for a decade. He said he made his first trip there 10 years ago. He's made several trips since then, and, of course, they've done Bible distribution. They've had to do their best to try to do some training. The training, of course, as you might imagine, has to take place outside of North Korea when pastors and believers get permission to go to, for example, a free zone in China. And, of course, this is the place where the greatest persecution of Christians takes place. Every year, our friends at Open Doors put together a list of those places where there's the greatest persecution. And number one on the list, interestingly enough, is North Korea. The other 9, by the way, in the top 10 are all Muslim countries. But this, I think, just helps you understand that this is just a terrible plight for these individuals. Vernon Brewer says that of about 300,000 North Korean Christians that the government recognizes, about 70,000 of them are in forced labor camps. That's almost 25% of Christians who are imprisoned. Most of them never come out. And so you can recognize that we should certainly be in prayer for those in North Korea. And if there is any way, and this is somewhat speculative, but if there's any way that this summit in Singapore and the attempts to try to provide a denuclearized Korean peninsula also would remove the restrictions that Christians face in North Korea, that would be a tremendous gain. So let me again encourage you to read some of these articles, one on political overreaction, another one on this whole issue of what it is like to be a Christian in North Korea. And if that will encourage you to pray for our brothers and sisters in North Korea, I think we've accomplished our goal here today. When we come back, we are going to spend some time talking with Lauren Green McAfee. She is the co-author with her mother, Jackie Green, of How a Woman's Every Day Shapes an Eternal Legacy. The book is entitled Only One Life, and it is published by Zondervan, and we're thrilled to have her in studio. If you'd like to find some of those articles I've been mentioning, they're available at the website, pointofview.net. And as you go there, I hope you'll also click on the button that says donate, because we certainly need your financial support, especially as we are nearing our fiscal year end, which ends later this month. So again, if you can help us out, we'd greatly appreciate it. Take advantage of the articles we posted, and when we come back, we'll talk about A Woman's Legacy. What a great book and a great conversation we'll have with Lauren right after these important messages.
The young man burst into tears. He was in obvious distress, but thankfully, Don Blythe had the exact answers he needed. God took a chance encounter in a restaurant bathroom of all places and turned it into a divine appointment that forever impacted a young couple and saved the life of their unborn child. Don was able to help because he was prepared. And where does Don Blythe get some of the information and resources he needs to be ready for the next opportunity? He listens to Point of View. He listens because others like you took action. This is your opportunity to help equip people to be ready. And because of a special matching challenge, your gift here in June will have double the impact. You can be part of some amazing transformations, and it all starts with a simple phone call, 1-800-347-5151, or by clicking into pointofview.net. One day, you are going to make a difference. That future is now. 1-800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. We're going to spend some time in this first hour here talking about legacy. And also, of course, we'll have a millennial in the studio, and we have talked about millennials all week. It's interesting. Yesterday, we talked about the new Copernicans and the whole issue of reaching out to the millennial generation. Tomorrow, we'll have Nick Pitts sitting in this chair, and he will actually convene our millennial roundtable. I'll join him along with Chelsea Human. So we'll have lots to talk about, but I think you're going to really enjoy the conversation this first hour, because we're talking about especially a woman's legacy. And we bring back to the microphone an individual that we've interviewed before in studio, Lauren Green McAfee, who is the corporate ambassador for Hobby Lobby. This book is entitled Only One Life, How a Woman's Everyday Shapes an Eternal Legacy. And if you're not familiar with Lauren, of course, she's working now with Hobby Lobby, but in the past has worked with her father, Steve Green, in founding the Museum of the Bible, where she worked as a curator, an artifact collector, and also the director of community engagement. And you perhaps have seen some of the interviews with her and her husband, Michael. And Lauren, it's great to have you in studio with us.
Great to be here. Happy to be here today. Thanks.
We'll talk about the book, but we've got to talk about the Museum of the Bible for just a minute, because everybody that I know that has had a chance to see it, including some people you just met a few minutes ago, just love it. But for a lot of our listeners, they probably are not familiar that much about it, even though we do talk about it on a pretty regular basis. And I perhaps should be getting some kind of background as community engagement, because I'm as big a promoter of the Museum of the Bible as probably you are. But talk about how you've been involved. This is an incredible project that I think anybody that goes to Washington, D.C. really needs to participate with.
Well, thank you. We appreciate that you have gotten to share about it, and we hope that your listeners have been able to go, some of them. But Museum of the Bible got started back in 2010. I was one of the first people to come on board with working on the project with my dad. So my dad, Steve Green, was kind of managing this private collection that my family had of artifacts, and we were wanting to see this collection used to be able to show the story, the impact, and the history of the Bible, and wanted those to be housed somewhere. And so when we kind of expected that someone else would take on the project and that they would place the museum somewhere and we would donate these artifacts. But in the end, we kind of realized that this was something we felt God continuing to lead us toward. And so my parents and family started looking for a building, and we were looking actually here in Dallas, as well as New York City and Washington, D.C. And we did an economic impact study and found that a museum of the Bible was of interest for a large majority of Americans. We were very interested to see that, and that people would want to go to Washington, D.C. to see it, which makes sense. It's kind of the museum capital in America. And so we started looking for a building and then purchased the building. And it was the Washington Design Center. It had been an office building for designers, and they had kind of all been beginning to move out. And then once the building was purchased, we tore out some of the floors and then constructed it into Museum of the Bible.
Well, again, it is very close to the Smithsonian Museum, so it's easy to get to. And for any listener out there that is thinking, well, it's just going to be lots of dusty stacks of books and Bibles and Bible translations, well, no, it's incredible in terms of the high-tech involvement that you have and the use of video. There's even a ride in there.
That's right.
You go back to the ancient Jerusalem. There's just all sorts of different things that make it the most unusual museum I think I've ever been in my life.
Yeah, so the museum itself is 430,000 square feet. It's a large museum. It's the third largest museum actually in Washington, D.C. And it would take you a couple days to really go through everything if you were wanting to read all of the information that's there. But you're right. We have really engaging, interactive environment. And the main three floors that we have in the museum are the history of the Bible, the impact of the Bible, and then the narrative of the Bible. So we're wanting to really share kind of these three different perspectives about the Bible. And with the history of the Bible, kind of answering the question of how did we get the Bible that we have today? So when you hold your Bible in your hands, kind of what is the story through history that brought us this book? So we have a lot of different artifacts on display in that floor. And then the impact floor, which is one of my favorites, we talk about how has this book impacted different areas of our world. And we highlight about 30 different areas. So you've got the arts, science, hospitals, criminal justice system. How has the Bible's impact been used there? How has the Bible been used in movies and in music and in the arts? So all these different areas showing kind of the Bible has touch points with all of these areas of life. And so its impact is still felt today in a lot of ways that we might not even realize.
Yes.
And then the narrative floor talking about the story. What is this book about?
Well, again, I love the history that is there. And again, when we mentioned translations, one of the things we've been talking about is on some of the conversation we've had recently is the number of different translations that have come out. And you go into this one room and you can actually see the books of the Bible that have been translated or the entire Bible that's been translated. And you can pull out and say, I didn't know we even had one in this particular language, this Indian dialect or whatever it might be. And so it's just, again, powerful.
That is one of the rooms that whenever people go to the museum, often leave and say that was one of their favorite places.
Yes.
And the room you're describing is kind of a focus of all of the translations that exist of the Bible. There are about 6,000 languages in the world today, and 2,000 of the languages have the Bible complete translation done. 2,000 languages roughly have portions of the Bible, so maybe the New Testament and the Psalms. And then there are still 2,000 languages in the world today that don't have the Bible in their translation at all. And so that's kind of represented in that room. You can see the Bibles that do have a translation, and then there are blank pages on the Bibles that don't have the translation yet. So you can actually come and be a part of that, and you can sign up to be a part of the translation process and say, I want to fund for this language to get the book of John, or even John, chapter 3 maybe, and even down to the verse if you want to help fund that and be a part of getting the Bible translated into every language. Again,
just one other comment, and then we'll take a break, is some people might say, well, how do I know which parts of the museum I'd like to see, since you've told me that I'd have to be there for 2 weeks to see it all? They get a little device that they can kind of show what their interests are, and then it takes them through the museum so that they can focus on what would be their most significant areas of interest. But if you have some time, give yourself more than a day, because there's just that much there.
There's a lot to see, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is amazing. So again, I want to say thank you to you and to your father and to your grandfather and everybody that's had this vision. It's just a great opportunity to learn a little bit more about God's Word, about God's Word in terms of history. Also, you get a chance to go back to what it looks like to Israel. If you never get to go to Israel, you go to the second best, I think. I mean, there's some pictures I take, and I say, where do you think that is? And they go, well, that's Israel. I said, no, that's in the Museum of the Bible, if you can believe that. And so just a lot of great material. But when we come back, we're going to spend some time talking about this book that you've written with your mother, Jackie Green and Lauren Green McAfee, which, again, is an incredible book on how a woman's everyday shapes an eternal legacy. If you've been around the Green family, you know that legacy is a big word and a big issue, and we're going to talk about legacy, but also talk about 36 different women in the Bible that illustrate a legacy of courage or generosity or witness or wisdom or teaching or rescue or compassion, boldness, tenacity, faith, prayer, and loyalty. Those are the 10 chapters. We'll do our best to cover at least a few of them. And, of course, along the way, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We have more information about Lauren and about the book on our website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break. We'll get into the book right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Perhaps you've read Nathaniel Hawthorne's classic novel, The Scarlet Letter. Students who read it today usually react with mockery and ridicule. They wonder how a society could be so prudish and punitive to force Hester Prynne to wear a label of shame for her sin. How unenlightened for society to place public moral condemnation on her. But Dan McLaughlin reminds us in a recent column that the Scarlet Letter is back. Today, we don't require people to wear a scarlet A, but we do shun them and brand them as outcasts if they violate the current standards of political correctness. The example he uses is the plight of a Manhattan lawyer who let fly a racial tirade at Spanish-speaking workers at a restaurant. Unfortunately for him, what he said was filmed and widely disseminated. Apparently, he has been kicked out of his office building, had protesters outside his building, and has already lost at least one client. Perhaps the lawyer deserved all of this negative attention. He apparently has a history of obnoxious behavior. I'm not interested in defending him, but I do want to point out that public shaming for bigotry seems to have become the new Scarlet Letter. He may lose his livelihood over stupid comments captured on an iPhone. It's worth mentioning that the column by Dan McLaughlin was written before the latest controversy surrounding Roseanne Barr and Samantha Bee. Lawyers, comedians, and politicians are subjected to public moral condemnation. Dan McLaughlin wonders how far we should go and how indelibly the stain should endure. Isn't it ironic that the people shunning and shaming today are the same people who tell us not to be morally judgmental? Unfortunately, what they are missing are key biblical categories of sin, repentance, and forgiveness. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Talking today about this wonderful book, Only One Life, and it deals with the issue of legacy. And Lauren, of course, you and your mother have written about this, but again, the Green family really talks a lot about legacy. That goes all the way back to your grandfather, and we've talked about that last time we had him in studio. Of course, we've been reading his book and using it in my Sunday school class and other things, but there is just a lot of talk about legacy, including even the opening chapter that takes you all the way back to the great-grandparents, right? I mean, this is quite a legacy in the Green family, isn't it? Tell us more.
So if anyone's read my grandfather's book, Giving It All Away, he talks a lot about legacy. And so my mom and I kind of expand on this conversation of legacy. And in our family, I've been grateful to be a beneficiary of these conversations and hearing my grandparents as well as my parents realize the significance of having the conversation as a family of what is it really that that's going to be said of us once we're gone? And what is it how are we living our lives in a way to impact even 7 generations down the line and thinking long term? So when we think about legacy, it's not so much, what are the monetary things or possessions that we'll leave down, but really it's this idea of passing on values. And so the woman that we look to in our family as a hero of legacy is actually Marie Green, who was my great-grandmother. So my grandfather, David Green's mother, she was a pastor's wife, and she had 6 children. So my grandpa had 5 siblings. And he was husband,
second to the youngest, if I remember right.
Yes, he was one of the younger ones. And they grew up very poor because my great-grandparents, pastors of small churches, like 100 people or fewer. And so to support the family of 8 off of the tithes of, just a small church was difficult. And so my great-grandmother Marie, though, was always so faithful to care for the people well that they were in their church, to serve her family and invest in her children, and to shape a legacy of generosity and hard work and of prayer and faith. And so that's really the legacy that my grandpa talks about. He sees living on in now, his grandchildren, and wanting to pass that same legacy on. So it's more of values and investing in eternal things as opposed to kind of the temporal things that really won't matter in the future.
And again, let me recommend that book because you'll also learn a little bit about your dad and your grandfather putting together picture frames in the garage, right? That's how all of this got started. And then, of course, the very famous lawsuit. And matter of fact, right now we're in the season in which there have been some various other religious liberty cases. I noticed, interestingly enough, in the most recent one coming down on Masterpiece Cake and Jack Phillips, they refer back to the Hobby Lobby case. So again, you can see the significance, the legacy, both in the legal area, but also just the legacy within a family. So let's get into a couple of them. One of them is the legacy of courage. And the individual that you obviously pick is Esther. When you talk about being a woman for such a time as this, it's really important for women to understand that they should be people and women of courage as well, right?
That's right. Yeah, we loved highlighting Esther's story because it is such a beautiful story of the way that she was willing to take at great risk to herself, stand for what she knew was right, and that was to risk her own life for the sake of standing up for her people who were about to be killed by this advisor of the king's who sent out this decree for all of the Jewish people to be killed. So reading her story and kind of thinking about it through this lens of what was the legacy that she was investing, we just saw this beautiful example of courage and the way that that can be an example to each of us. And we try to, in each of these stories, share them through just kind of the lens of looking at how can we apply this to our life. So what does that mean for women today? And that may not mean for most women that we're risking our lives for something we believe in, but that does mean we can have courage in our day-to-day and kind of shaping our legacy with the same courage that maybe that's being willing to speak up for what's right or to stand up for someone that needs help and can't stand up for themselves. And it takes courage to do those things. And that's something that each of us can look in our daily lives and say, how can I be shaping a legacy of courage, and looking to Esther as an example for that.
And I might just mention that the structure of the book is 10 different chapters on different legacies, and we'll try to cover most of them, but maybe not all. And it's written in such a way that, first of all, you start with a biblical character, and then you take it into contemporary or historical situations where there are other individuals. Lottie Moon, for example, ends up in that particular chapter, and many other individuals. And so I would say for just a minute before we go any further that for somebody that would like to use this as a Bible study, I can't even imagine how you would not want to this fall, as you put together your women's structure, want to use this book, published by Zondervan, 250 pages, as your text to really begin to study all these famous Bible characters as well as contemporary or historical women and learn some of the lessons of their legacy, right?
That's right. Yeah. So some of the women that we highlighted were women that will be recognized from the Bible, like Esther. And then some of them are women that may be lesser known, like Deborah's story or Huldah, and we'll probably maybe get to them later, but women who in their own way had their own legacy. And we may just have a glimpse of that from the short passages that we have. But yeah, really trying to bring to light these incredible women in the Bible and their stories.
I might just mention, too, we have a link to your website in case people say, maybe I'd like to invite you or your mom or both of you to come to speak. So that's available, too, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
So,
onlyonelifebook.com.
Yeah, and we also have your website there. And, of course, we also, if you click on it, can get the book in paperback, Kindle, and is, I guess, an audiobook coming out.
That's
so
right.
Pretty amazing what's available for everybody. Before we take a break, we've talked about legacy of courage, legacy of generosity. It would not be a good Green family interview without generosity. And of all the people to pick, I thought it was so interesting, the widow's mite. Talk about that.
Yeah, so the widow's mite story in the Bible is one that really reminds me a lot of my great-grandmother, because she showed the legacy of generosity in our own family. And when we were looking at stories of the Bible, it was, a beautiful example. And if people aren't familiar with the story, this was in the temple, the widow who had only 2 mites. It was a very small insignificant monetarily amount, but she gave all that she had. Whereas there were others there, Pharisees, who were able to give large gifts and were being very vocal about it and wanted to kind of be recognized for this gift. But Jesus is looking at the heart of our generosity, not the size, but what is it in our heart that we want. And as we give generously of the little that we have or the great amounts that we do have, God cares about the heart, not about being recognized. So I love the example that she was of generosity, because we can all be generous. We can all live generously, regardless of the amount of wealth that we have or what status we have. We can each be generous with the gifts and the talents and the treasures that God has given us.
What I think is so interesting is you look through history or even contemporary examples. We have some people that just have the gift of giving. Your grandfather certainly fits in that category. R.L. Letourneau down the road, have a Letourneau University. And I know of others. I won't embarrass some of the people I know, even around this community, that just give sacrificially. But there is kind of an idea that many believers are starting to have that you can't outgive God. And we really need to begin to reevaluate not only what we own, but what owns us. Mm-hmm. And as we can advance God's kingdom, after all, there's nobody that at the end of their hearse has a U-Haul trailer,
That's right.
Somebody says, well, what did he leave? He left it all, when he died. Yeah. And so, again, we need to pay it forward, don't we?
That's right. Yeah. And, my grandpa always says at one point in his life when he was, beginning to kind of grow in this generosity and this heart of generosity he has, he was saying, well, we'll never be able to outgive God. But he would just kind of throw that phrase around, and he jokes that, he at one point felt convicted. It was like, well, you've never really tried. So that really inspired him to continue growing this generous heart that he has, and today is a great example of generosity.
Again, appreciate the Green family and the giving that they have already been involved with in all these years, and many other individuals that we could mention as well. But I need to take a break, and let me just mention that when we come back, we'll talk about a couple of the other legacies, the legacy of witness, for example, Mary Magdalene. We mentioned Deborah, so I got to do the legacy of wisdom because she was a judge. We'll get into a couple of others, but again, there are actually 12 chapters. I think I misspoke and said 10 before. There's actually 12 chapters, and so these fit perfectly within the kind of study that I think you would maybe want to do in your small group. And guys, you don't have to say, well, this is just for women. You can learn some incredible lessons here as well. So let me encourage those of you that are in positions of leadership. We have a link to Lauren's webpage as well as some links to the book. You can no doubt find the book in your local bookstore because it's published by Zondervan, about 250 pages. But if you can't find it, we also have a link so that you can get it in paperback, Kindle, and audiobook. And I hope that some of you will consider not only reading the book, but using this as a way to get other people to think about legacy. And in many different ways, we certainly need to take the time to build this potential for the future and to recognize that we want to, when it's all said and done, we've left a legacy for the next generation. We are the inheritors of those who've come before us. We're standing on the shoulders of others that have been faithful, godly men and women. So let me encourage you to use this book as a way to leave a legacy as well. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll look at a couple of other chapters in the book. And if you'd like to join us, feel free to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212, or else sit back, take some notes, and get a copy of the book. All that coming up right after this.
Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian schools, training up a new generation, to launch ministries on college campuses, even to run for and serve in Congress. So again, what are you doing to make a positive change? One way to start today is to join the Truth Team, Truth Team 360, and help us change lives. Our nation needs a Truth Team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Continue your conversation today as we talk about Only One Life. It is a book published by Zondervan. You should be able to find it in your local bookstore. Lauren in studio with us today, and we're working our way through many of the chapters, and we've already spent a little bit of time talking about the legacy of courage as well as the legacy of generosity. How about the legacy of witness? Mary Magdalene, of all things.
Mary Magdalene is one of my favorite examples from the Bible that we get to talk about because I love the witness that she had. She was actually the first witness to the empty tomb after Christ rose. And she went on to, again, share about Christ with many people. But the reason I love that was the significance of having a woman as the first witness to this most historic event of Christ raising from the dead and finding the empty tomb. Because in that time, in the Bible time of the Bible being lived out, women's word was not even able to be used in the court of law. So women did not have the even status to be considered as a witness for different events if they were in a legal case. And so the fact that God and Jesus gave women value as the first witnesses to the most important thing, Christ raising from the dead, is just a beautiful example to me of the way that God loves and created women with equal value and dignity as men. And so that's one of the examples that we have from the Bible for witness, and I love the story that she has.
Well, again, we've talked about that, too, just from an apologetics point of view, because we spend a fair amount of time not only helping our listeners know how to articulate a biblical worldview, but how to defend it. And I think one of the best arguments for the fact that the Bible is giving you truth is that if this was all made up, there is no way that a Jewish man in the first century would have the first person to have seen the risen Christ be a woman.
Exactly.
And so this shows, if nothing else, it elevates women as something that's being talked about right now in the Southern Baptist Convention and something we talk about so often here around the round table, and probably we'll get into it tomorrow in our Millennial Roundtable, but it also, I think, is just a very good, powerful argument for the authenticity of Scripture as well. Scripture is willing to tell the whole story, warts and all, and again, whether it's David, a man after God's own heart, and his failings, or whether it's Peter denying Christ, I mean, it tells the whole story, and if nothing else, shows its authenticity. But I'm going to keep moving because you said one of the ones you enjoy the most is Deborah. That's the legacy of wisdom, and that shows that women, especially Deborah, were judges and were individuals who actually exercised godly wisdom. Tell us more.
So with Deborah, her story is found in the book of Judges, and there's just a few verses about her legacy and the story of her life. But she was a woman who was a prophet. She was a prophetess, but also became the first and only female judge that we see in the book of Judges. And so she was a judge over the people of Israel, and in a time where there were significant battles and conflicts going on, she actually had great wisdom to discern how to pursue victory and how to lead the army into victory. And the army leaders were even saying, we won't go forward in battle without Deborah present, because they just trusted in her wisdom and her discernment. So she was a great leader, and it does point out that she was married. And so we highlight in the book this kind of small fact that there's a brief mention of her husband, and we love that she didn't sacrifice her marriage for the sake of leading and doing the work of God's calling. And we think that's really important because as women, we need to value and cherish marriage if we are married, and then still step into the callings that God has for us. And she beautifully balanced that with great wisdom.
Oh, I think so. And again, you even talk about where you find wisdom. Obviously, we know in the Scriptures, but talk about that for just a minute, because we really want to have people not only having facts, but they have the wise use of those facts, right?
Yeah, and my mom and I talk about the wisdom, really ultimate wisdom can be found in Scripture. And for my mom and I, the Bible is our foundation of everything that we look to as truth, and we try to apply that to our lives. And so if we're wanting to look to the most true information that we can find, the most true things about ourselves even, it's all in Scripture. And Scripture is the greatest wisdom of all, written by God through the people that he used to actually get it down on paper. And that's what we talk about in the wisdom chapter. And we talk about Queen Elizabeth, the current Queen of England, and her highlighting the role and the significance of the Bible. She does a Christmas address every year, and she has a number of times mentioned that the Bible is her guide, and that she had prayed whenever she was crowned as the queen, prayed that the people of her kingdom would pray for her to have the wisdom, and that she would follow the Bible's wisdom in ruling the kingdom. So the Bible is the ultimate source of wisdom.
Again, the book deals with so many different legacies. We just talked about the legacy of wisdom. How about the legacy of teaching? And there you take us to King Josiah, which I thought was helpful because it is important to recognize how we really need to pass from one generation spiritual truth to the next generation. We use the illustration sometimes of passing the baton, if you will, in terms of a race. But the teaching aspect is very important. And sometimes women think, well, that's what the men do. You know, after all, that's the pastor and that's the teacher in the Sunday school class. But there's all sorts of places where women are called to be teachers as well.
That's right. There are lots of ways that women can be teachers. And we highlight the story of Huldah, who, again, in the book of Judges, is a woman who knows the Bible and teaches that and helps to pass that along as a legacy of teaching. And in my own life, my mother and many other women in my life have had great influence in my life as teachers. So I was taught by my mother. She likes to joke that she taught me how to read, and because now I'm in a PhD program, she's very proud of the fact that she's the one that first taught me to read, and it got me this far in life. But there are other women in my life who, as mentors and Bible teachers, have taken the time to mentor me and disciple me, and that's a great way to pour into the next generation of teaching the Word of God. And that's such an incredible legacy that women can impart, is sharing through teaching and investing in others in that way.
Yes. And as we go through this, there are going to be some names. You mentioned Huldah just a minute ago, but when we get into the legacy of rescue, the legacy of compassion, these are not kind of the top of the mind kind of individuals, are they? These are individuals where we can, in some respects, dig in a little bit deeper and find out a little bit more about those individuals that also had a place in the scriptures, but aren't necessarily the ones you read in some of your basic Bible stories, right?
That's right. Yes. We hope that people will dive into the book as well, because there are many women. And interestingly, some of the women that we highlighted, their name wasn't particularly mentioned. So, we like the woman at the well.
Yes.
She didn't have her name, but we know her as the woman at the well. And so in this, we fictionalize it in a bit by giving them names and saying, this is the name that we're assigning this woman for now, even though we don't know her name, just to help make that connection more personal and to know the kind of stories, try and understand it through their eyes. And so that's what people will find as we kind of read through the book. And I hope that people will pick it up and be inspired, encouraged by the stories of these women in the Bible.
I think so. Let's, if we can, maybe talk about the legacy of boldness for just a minute, because we talked about courage, but this is boldness born of need. And I thought that one was very important because, if nothing else, Lauren, we find ourselves sort of attacked right now. And I'm not telling you anything that the Green family doesn't know. Just imagine all the things that you had to go through with the Hobby Lobby case and all the comments that have been made. I mean, some of the most vilified companies in the country right now, Chick-fil-A, Hobby Lobby, because they're people that just say things about you. And sometimes it's easy to withdraw. But not only do we talk about the legacy of courage, what about the legacy of boldness?
This chapter was one of my favorites, honestly. The women that we highlight in the chapter, the Legacy of Boldness chapter, was the woman at the well, and then Rosa Parks from history,
Right.
and then Amy Orr Ewing, who is a modern-day woman. And with the woman at the well, it would have been very significant at that time for a woman to even speak to a man that was approaching, especially considering that Jesus was a Jewish man. And so whenever Jesus was approaching, she did have this kind of boldness in her that she stayed, and then Jesus engaged in a conversation with her. And once Jesus kind of shared the truth about the living water that she could have through knowing God, and she believed that, she became the first woman evangelist, you could say. She went out and told the entire village about this good news that she had become a beneficiary of. And so the boldness that she had to be in this dialogue with Christ and not shy away from that, and then to share the truth with all of the people everyone that she knew she came in contact with, she was telling about this good news, was great boldness that I hope that I can incorporate more of in my life.
And then, of course, Rosa Parks, which is historical,
yes.
and Amy Orr Ewing, who's been on the program with us. And I think, if I counted right, this may be the thickest chapter in the book. I may be wrong on that, but it shows, if nothing else, you appreciated that. We need to take another one of those mandatory breaks. When we come back, we'll finish off talking about a few others. I've kind of skipped around a little bit, but again, 12 different chapters, plus a conclusion that I think you would find very helpful if you wanted to teach through maybe in a 12 or 3-week session, or maybe if you wanted to teach a Sunday school class, or pastors, you might think about whether or not this might even something you would like to do from the pulpit. So this is a new book published by Zondervan, and it is written by Jackie Green and Lauren. And this is, again, a book called Only One Life, How a Woman's Everyday Shapes an Eternal Legacy. We'll continue our conversation with her right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. $3.25 million. That's the price one New Jersey town will pay for its religious discrimination. Not long ago on this program, I told you about the refusal of Bernards Township, New Jersey, to grant a building permit to the Islamic Society of Basking Ridge, New Jersey. The society fought City Hall for at least 4 years, having their application denied 9 separate times. In November 2016, the U.S. Department of Justice filed a suit against the township, alleging a violation of the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. The Department of Justice won just 2 months later. But by May 2017, the township decided to give up the fight, settle with the government, and allow the Islamic Society to build their mosque. This is good news for religious liberty. Though Bernards Township, in this case, used their zoning laws to prevent the building of a mosque, it could have just as easily been a synagogue, a church, a cathedral, or other house of worship. City governments cannot intentionally throw up permitting obstacles to religious organizations. They must treat a religious organization's application for land use just like it would any other land use application. In a land that values freedom, our government should never make the free exercise of religion difficult. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
More people today are saying Americans don't really need religion, but America does need religion. Religion helps the economy, families, and even national security. Learn more by reading Saving America, 10 Reasons Religious Freedom is the Key to Our Nation's Future. You can download this free booklet at firstliberty.org/Saving America. That's firstliberty.org/Saving America. Discover 10 ways religion benefits America at firstliberty.org/Saving America.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. In the next hour, we're going to be talking about drone warfare, an individual that has actually carried on the legacy of the Tom Clancy novels. I think you're really going to enjoy that conversation. But we still have Lauren in studio with us for a few more minutes. We also have a link to her website. And before we're done, I want to talk a little bit more about how you can not only use this book, but some of the resources that are available through her and her mother. But let's get into at least two more. One is Chapter 10, The Legacy of Faith. Well, that takes us to Mary, obviously.
Yes, yeah. So Mary, the mother of Jesus, and the incredible faith we can see that she had to, whenever she was hearing this news, that she was going to be pregnant and having God's son. She asked one question, and this was, how is this possible? And then from there, she trusted God and had an incredible faith legacy. But one of the other women we highlight in this book is one of my favorites, and her name is Elizabeth Ann Everest. A lot of people won't know her name, but her legacy is still being felt in the world today. So whenever Winston Churchill was growing up, his parents were very disengaged in his life. They sent him to boarding school. He would write letters to them asking his parents to come visit him, and they never visited him. But Elizabeth Ann Everest was his nanny. She's the woman that raised him, and she responded to those letters and would go and visit him and invested a faith and legacy of conviction in him. So the faith and conviction that he really had in his life, he really attributed to her. And so whenever he was, and when it was later in life, Winston had two things on his nightstand, and it was his Bible and then a picture of the woman that raised him, Elizabeth Ann Everest, and her legacy through Winston has impacted our world.
And there have been a couple of different Winston Churchill movies in the last year, and they have never really featured her the way you do in the book. So I really appreciate that. Let me just say that as we've been going through this, we have skipped over some chapters, but some of them deal with Kay Arthur, certainly. And we can certainly talk about Ruth Bell Graham. We also talk about historical people like Harriet Tubman and Florence Nightingale, and, of course, some of these others. But let me get into at least one more, and that is the legacy of prayer. That, of course, takes us to 1 Samuel and Hannah, right?
That's right. Hannah, who prayed fervently for her desire for children, and love the way that she didn't give up. She constantly went to prayer and didn't, even in the midst of, I'm sure, what were seasons of doubt of she was being heard, she still continued in prayer, and then God eventually answered her prayer. And so I love the legacy that she is inspiring me towards. And the woman who today lives that out really well in my life is my own grandmother. So I write about Barbara Green, my grandmother, and the prayer legacy that she's invested. My grandpa will always tell us that, Grandma wakes up in the middle of the night and she has a prayer closet in her house, and she'll go in the prayer closet and be praying for us, each family member by name. And so just a couple weeks ago, my grandpa was like, yeah, Barbara was up at 2 a.m. again last night praying for everyone. And whenever our family went through the court case, we were always constantly looking to my grandmother to lead us in prayer, and to just it was very encouraging knowing that she was always placing our court case before the Lord and trusting in Him and bringing us to prayer. So she's got a beautiful prayer legacy in our family.
What about that movie, War Room? Wasn't that something?
Wonderful. Yes. People should watch it.
Yeah, and again, if you want to understand a little bit what your grandmother's like, that's what that was, It was certainly great.
Picture.
And I might just mention that you start the chapter here by quoting from Stormy O'Mardian, which is in her book Prayer Warrior. And, of course, she's written so many books on the subject of prayer, most of which have been published by Harvest House, been on the program with us as well. And just the incredible legacy of prayer, not only of her, but of your other individuals that we've talked about as well. So just incredible book that, as I said before, about 250 pages. But let's for just a minute talk about how people can connect up with you, because I think it would be certainly an opportunity, first of all, for individuals, if they wanted to teach through this. You've written it in such a way with the 12 chapters and the conclusion that you could really focus on it for a quarter. The quarter is 13 weeks, and this fits pretty well. So the way you've put it together, people could read it once a week, or you could preach through it. You also have an audio book and some other resources. So talk about how you intend that people could use this even in not only their individual study, but in small group studies as well.
Yeah, well, I think a helpful layout for if you are in a small group study. I know that in my church we have women's book clubs, and they meet in the summer and as well as throughout the semester. And it really provides a landing place for starting a conversation about what does it mean for each of us as individuals to shape our own legacy by looking at these examples and kind of walking through each of these different character traits and saying, how is this going to impact my life and how can I be shaping a legacy? Because each of us has the opportunity to shape a legacy, and we have to think about what is it that is going to live on beyond my own life. Like once I'm gone from this earth, what is it that'll be left? And so as we see with these women, Elizabeth Ann Everest, her legacy lived on and is still impacting our world today because of the faith. And she didn't in the moment feel that she was shaping an eternal legacy that would impact our world. She was just being faithful to the daily opportunities that she had by investing in Winston. And we write this in the chapter, but Winston was not an easy child. He was very rambunctious and a little feisty, but she did the hard work of showing up every day and caring for him well. And so, whenever we have the difficult things in our life and it's just the mundaneness of the day, we know that has a purpose, that has a long-term purpose if we honor God and glorify Him.
We were talking about prayer just a minute ago, because you also talk about Susanna Wesley. I mean, again, John Wesley, Charles Wesley, talk about a legacy there. That's an incredible one as well. So there's just a lot of great stories in this. as you go along. And again, a legacy of courage, generosity, witness, wisdom, teaching, as well as rescue, compassion, boldness, tenacity, faith, prayer, and loyalty. Didn't cover all 12, but we did a pretty good job, didn't we, today?
Yes.
And if nothing else, those are some great resources. Talk about, as people land on your website, is it possible that they could schedule you or your mother or both of you to come and speak?
Yes, that's right. So if you're wanting information on the book, that's onlyonelifebook.com. And then my personal blog is laurenamcafee.com, and there is a contact me form on there. So, yeah, if people are wanting to get in contact with me, you can go there. And then also on Twitter, Lauren A. McAfee is my Twitter, and I'm always checking that.
As a matter of fact, we show that up on the screen here, and if you click on one of them, it also has some material about Museum of the Bible. So
Perfect.
If people want to know about that as well. So again, let me encourage people that if they're going to be traveling this summer, go to the Museum of the Bible. If you are thinking about some kind of study for especially a women's group, but again, I want to make this available to all men too, because I think you will learn some incredible lessons from this as well. This is a book that is published by Zondervan, and again, some great resources that you can find available, and we have all those available at our website, pointofview.net. And we always appreciate your millennial perspective. We have our Millennial Roundtable tomorrow, and I just need to get you back here joining the roundtable, either by phone or in studio.
I hope I can make it in the studio sometime. I loved joining by phone last time, but
again,
someday.
Nothing else. Pray for you and your husband as you are in your doctoral program at Southern.
Right.
So we'll work on that as well. But that's all we have for this segment. But let me just mention Mike Maden is going to be with us in just a minute. We're going to be talking about the ethics of drone warfare. Maybe you saw the Eye in the Sky movie a number of years ago, or seen some of the others. You might have some thoughts about that. And, of course, we're also going to be talking about the fact that he has become not only a Tom Clancy fan, but somebody that's kept that particular enterprise going. So it's going to be a great conversation we'll have here in studio with him as well. And if you find yourself saying, I'd like to know a little bit more about all the things you've covered here today, the various articles we've posted, the commentary that I have posted today, some of our take action, even our videos, it's all available at the website pointofview.net. If you want to know a little bit more about Lauren, you can click on that button, and it has a contact form, so you can contact her. If you are interested in the book, you should be able to find it in your local bookstore, but we have a link there so you can get it in paperback, Kindle, and, of course, there's also an audio book, so just a lot of resources available to you. And so go to the website, pointofview.net. And as we come to the end of June, don't forget it's the end of our fiscal year. So if you can help us out financially with a one-time gift, click on that button that says donate, and we would greatly appreciate it. Let's take a break. We have a lot more to cover, and we will do that right after these important messages.
The young man burst into tears. He was in obvious distress, but thankfully, Don Blythe had the exact answers he needed. God took a chance encounter in a restaurant bathroom of all places and turned it into a divine appointment that forever impacted a young couple and saved the life of their unborn child. Don was able to help because he was prepared. And where does Don Blythe get some of the information and resources he needs to be ready for the next opportunity? He listens to Point of View. He listens because others like you took action. This is your opportunity to help equip people to be ready. And because of a special matching challenge, your gift here in June will have double the impact. You can be part of some amazing transformations, and it all starts with a simple phone call, 1-800-347-5151, or by clicking into pointofview.net. One day, you are going to make a difference. That future is now. 1-800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour, I think you're going to really enjoy our conversation, especially if you like techno thrillers and things of that nature. I don't know if we have any Tom Clancy fans out there, but we probably do, because we have in studio with us Mike Maden, and I'll explain how that all connects up in just a minute. An individual grew up in California's San Joaquin Valley, so a shout out to some of our listeners there in the Central Valley, and also an individual that has a PhD in political science from the University of California at Davis, and also an individual that went here at Dallas Seminary, spent some time in Dallas, originally from Tennessee, and I think you're back in Tennessee, but you're here because of the release of a book tour for the Clancy series, and that book, I think, Line of Sight, comes out today, doesn't it?
Yes, sir. It came out, it launched today, so very excited.
And I might just mention for our local listeners that they could actually come to a book signing at Half Price Books, right?
Half Price Books in Louisville at 7 o'clock.
So,
talking books, signing books, and I'm a problem solver. If you haven't bought a Father's Day gift yet, I've got a solution for you.
Well, that's good. Okay, we've got to, right off the bat, Mike Maden, I've got our link to your website, and as people click on that, they see all these Clancy books, and they're going, well, okay, you gotta explain what's going on here, because when they click on your picture, it says basically all the things that I just mentioned, TomClancy.com. And then it says, oh, wait a minute, Tom Clancy, Line of Sight by Mike Maden. So how in the world did you end up writing Tom Clancy novels?
Boy, that's just a great story. It is a combination of God's grace and his sense of humor. To make a long story short, I had a 4-book deal with Penguin Random House on a series called Drone.
Yes.
And the editor for the paperback editions of those is a wonderful gentleman by the name of Thomas Colgan. He is a legend in the industry. But he's also the series editor for the Tom Clancy series. And so when 2 of the existing writers for the Tom Clancy series moved on to pursue their own series,
right?
He needed a couple of people to write, and he was familiar with my work, and he was kind enough and gracious enough to give me the call, which on the one hand was the greatest phone call of my literary life, perhaps. Mike, would you like to be a Tom Clancy writer? Well, of course, because of books like, Hunt for October.
I think that's the first one you read. I think if I read
yeah,
about
and that's
that.
The first one he wrote, and that was a game changer for me personally, but also
Right.
for the industry. He basically invented a genre with that book. It's unbelievable, where he made really technology almost a character in the novel, in the series. So what a privilege, what an honor to be asked to do that. And so, of course, I hang up the phone, and then I have a moment of absolute panic, because now I have to write a Tom Clancy novel.
Yes, you do.
But God was gracious, and things came together relatively quickly, and put that together. And so that worked out fairly well. And we hit number 3 on the New York Times bestseller list last year. Again, quite gracious. And so Line of Sight is now out.
Yes, and again, that's the one that's leading on the website here. If you go to pointofview.net and follow the link, or else just go to tomclancy.com, you'll see that that's the novel that you're talking about, the one that you're signing books for. And we'll certainly spend some time talking about that. But I want to come back to the whole issue of drone warfare in just a minute.
Sure.
But for another few minutes, since we oftentimes sponsor, and really next week we'll be talking about a Christian Writers Conference we do in Dallas every year, and encourage people to come here. Give some pointers, if you would, to some of our listeners, because they would say, I don't know that I'll ever write a techno thriller, but I'd love to know the process of you actually writing fiction and writing this in a way that obviously has been very successful, because these books show up on the New York Times bestseller list.
Well, certainly part of the reason why they show up on the New York Times bestseller list is the name of Tom Clancy, who is a legend in the industry.
Yes.
He's created this amazing universe of characters. And so I've been handed the keys to, well, the toy store. And so I get to go in and play in that place. And so the honor and privilege for me is to be in that world and to be part of that series. Having said that, though, yeah, writing is hard work. And the best advice I ever had about writing, whether to either create something new or to fix what you have or to get inspired, it's pretty simple. It's write.
Yes.
The solution to every writing problem.
Every day. Yes, that's what I say. Write every day.
Yeah.
And rewrite every day.
Yeah, there's an old saying that the only way you can learn how to write is to write.
Yes.
You can't. Someone can't teach you how to write. You have to really teach yourself through the process. Hemingway, among others, said the first draft is always, Scubala, according to Paul. It's hard. It's not good.
Yes.
And the reality is the first draft is always not good. And so it means you go back to rewriting. So all writing is really rewriting. So it really is about the discipline of sitting in the chair, fingers on the keyboard, manual or electric or digital, and writing. There's just no alternative to that. It's really that simple and that impossible.
Well, and again, one of the things that we've heard many people say, Malcolm Gladwell and others have coined the term, that you need to spend 10,000 hours. And if you're going to be an accomplished musician, you've got to spend lots of time in a chair crafting that particular instrument. And if you're a writer, the same thing. And some people just say, well, this is something that's really hard. Yes, it is, to commit yourself on a screen or on a piece of paper. But anything else, whether it's shooting a jump shot, whether it's swinging a golf club, it takes hours. And sometimes what you need to understand is that you're not going to arrive there overnight. But if you spend the time, you eventually find your voice, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And the most important thing is to find your voice. And you find your voice by being true to yourself and not trying to chase an audience or chase an idea, and certainly not to chase the almighty dollar. No. Write because you're called to write. Write because you're designed to write, because you're passionate about writing. And, again, as people of faith, I think there's another aspect to this, and that is that, I think we're called to be disciples. We're called to be obedient to the call in our lives. Right. And that means being obedient to the call of the design of our lives. And so if we're designed to be writers, we should be writing. Obedience is better than sacrifice.
Yes.
And so the question isn't, should I write? The question is, am I going to be obedient to the call?
Right.
And so that's how I began my journey and how I try to approach it every day. Am I being faithful to the thing I've been given? Madeline L'Engle, wonderful writer, amazing person. She has a wonderful book about writing and about the life of the artist. And she's got this great line, which I'll crib a little bit, if that's okay, because, well, genius always steals. But she says something to the effect, and I'll manipulate a little bit to say that, almost every definition I have for being a writer is the same definition I have for being a disciple. It takes focus, it takes discipline, it takes faithfulness.
Well said.
And if you are pursuing the gift in a faithful way, it will improve your spiritual life in the same way that as your spiritual life is improving, it improves your gift. The two go hand in hand. And to see writing as something separate and secular and different than my quote-unquote spiritual life, I think is a mistake. Who we are is expressed through the work of our hands. It's not the work of our hands. We are saved by the work of our hands, but the fact that we're saved means the work of our hands should be a reflection of that.
Right.
So it's terribly important that if one feels that one is called to be writing, that one writes. And again, the magic is that you sit down and in all of the pain, the frustration, and the fear, in a very genuine act of faith, you're staring at that blank page, and suddenly anything is possible.
Yes.
And what a wonderful place to be. And it's the most exciting place in the universe at the moment when you're sitting there. Unless you think about it too much, and it's the most terrifying. And that's what most people do. They freeze up and say, oh my, gosh, what do I do? Well, you start writing.
Yeah.
And Goethe has a quote, which I will mangle, but he says in effect that genius appreciates boldness. When you show up, genius shows up. When you show up, God will show up and work with you.
Yeah. I remember Chuck Swindoll saying sometimes when you just are obedient, then the gift takes over. Same way to say that. We have a lot more to talk about with Mike Maden. We'll do that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Perhaps you've read Nathaniel Hawthorne's classic novel, The Scarlet Letter. Students who read it today usually react with mockery and ridicule. They wonder how a society could be so prudish and punitive to force Hester Prynne to wear a label of shame for her sin. How unenlightened for society to place public moral condemnation on her. But Dan McLaughlin reminds us in a recent column that the Scarlet Letter is back. Today, we don't require people to wear a scarlet A, but we do shun them and brand them as outcasts if they violate the current standards of political correctness. The example he uses is the plight of a Manhattan lawyer who let fly a racial tirade at Spanish-speaking workers at a restaurant. Unfortunately for him, what he said was filmed and widely disseminated. Apparently, he's been kicked out of his office building, had protesters outside his building, and has already lost at least one client. Perhaps the lawyer deserved all of this negative attention. He apparently has a history of obnoxious behavior. I'm not interested in defending him, but I do want to point out that public shaming for bigotry seems to have become the new Scarlet Letter. He may lose his livelihood over stupid comments captured on an iPhone. It's worth mentioning that the column by Dan McLaughlin was written before the latest controversy surrounding Roseanne Barr and Samantha Bee. Lawyers, comedians, and politicians are subjected to public moral condemnation. Dan McLaughlin wonders how far we should go and how indelibly the stain should endure. Isn't it ironic that the people shunning and shaming today are the same people who tell us not to be morally judgmental? Unfortunately, what they are missing are key biblical categories of sin, repentance, and forgiveness. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have in studio with us today Mike Maden. And by the way, we also not only have a link to the Tom Clancy books, of course, Line of Sight coming out today, the previous one, Point of Contact. We also have a link to MikeMaden.com. Again, you don't have to know how to spell the name because we've got it all right there. Drone, Blue Warrior, Drone Command, Drone Threat. Those 4 books all are about drone warfare. So I thought for just a few minutes we might talk about that as well. Then I'm going to open up the phones. I got listeners probably that are in the military, love to speak to this issue, maybe some that are Tom Clancy fans, and they'll have a chance to chat with you in just a few minutes. But Mike, let's, if we can, talk about this idea of drone technology, because we are starting to learn a lot more about how instead of sending in troops, we can use drones to monitor what is happening and even fire missiles from those drones. Talk about the history of that, because this seems like a relatively new technology, but it isn't necessarily, is it?
Yeah, it feels new, and it's partly because we've seen so much combat footage from Iraq and Afghanistan. It's on the nightly news, and it's on YouTube, and so we feel like we're very familiar with it, but it's new to us. But in fact, the technology is quite old. Nikola Tesla in 1898 patented what was called the teleautomaton, which is a mouthful. Basically, it was a remote control boat.
Yeah.
And so really, what is a drone? It's really kind of a variation or a subset of robotics.
Yes.
But everything from, say, a Roomba, the little automated vacuum cleaners that skitter across the floor and pick up the dried Cheerios or the cat hair, that would be considered a drone. All the way up to a Mars rover running around on the surface of Mars.
Sure.
GPS satellites, the Chinese DF-21 carrier killer hypersonic missiles would be considered also a drone. Essentially, drones are anything with software and sensors, and usually we associate with mobility.
But again, some of the drones that we're used to also have cameras and so allow us to monitor a particular action, to fire a Hellfire missile, to take out a building, to take out a tank, all sorts of things. So it's gotten pretty sophisticated now, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely, yes. And really the Predator drones, which are now being retired, and the Reaper drones, even those are relatively older technology, but they're terribly useful for a number of reasons. And that's why the whole question of drones and warfare and ethics and morality keeps coming up. On the one hand, I mean, drones are like facts or neutral things. They're just pieces of technology.
Yes.
And it's kind of funny that when someone says there's a drone overhead or the police have drones, suddenly we get very nervous and very concerned and we start breaking out in cold sweat. But if there's a police helicopter overhead or a police car going by, we don't worry about it. So, I mean, what's the difference? And there's something about a human not being inside the machine,
right,
that it's almost like a visceral fear, almost like arachnophobia or something, that the idea of a machine without a person on it making a decision to harm or spy upon me or even kill me is somehow abhorrent. I think it speaks probably somewhat to the issue of human dignity. The idea that if something can take away my rights or my privacy or my freedom or my life, I want another human doing that, which if you stop and think about that, sounds kind of dumb too. But that's kind of the terror and the fear that is associated with drones. But bottom line is, drones are awesome machines. And by the way, drones can be things like Predators, but drones can be under the sea, on the sea, in the air, on the land, outer space. Some of the coolest drone technology is being designed right here in Texas. There are nano drones, nano motors, smaller than a human cell. They are spinning at 18,000 RPMs, which is about the speed of a jet turbine. And they can do things like deliver pharmaceuticals directly into cells. There's little tiny ones that are just little helixes, almost like, remember the finger traps we used to play with as a kid?
Right. Yeah.
They look like those. And I've seen those spinning and literally picking up things to deposit into cells. So that's also drone technology.
All the nanotechnology, yeah.
Yeah, so it's amazing. So everything from inside of our bodies all the way up to outer space. So having said all of that, why drones in combat? Well, they do a number of really interesting things. The bottom line is, in any combat system, the weak link is always the human being on board. Humans get scared, humans sweat, humans panic, they pass out. We're very fragile. We're skulls full of mush that get knocked around. We can fall asleep. We have low attention spans. And so suddenly an awful lot of technology and money and weight and fuel is spent on protecting human beings inside of aircraft or tanks or submarines. Take human beings out of that context. Suddenly these machines can be a lot cheaper, a lot faster, have much higher performances. And suddenly things like drone swarms are possible. It's a whole new way of fighting wars, which is another conversation we'll get into later. So bottom line is, drones, or if you prefer robots as the larger subset, are designed to do what? To do the jobs that are too dangerous or scary or repetitive or boring for human beings.
Yes.
So drones are freeing us up. Robots free us up from work and labor and things like warfare and death.
Well, and again, we've seen that with robots, because we talk about all the different activities now that take place in a factory that used to be full of drudgery and danger and all those kinds of issues. So that's one aspect of that as well. And, of course, now we're talking about driverless cars because, again, people fall asleep and don't maintain a safe distance from the car in front of them. So we already sort of understand those ideas, but we always get a little bit antsy when we think about driverless cars or drones flying overhead without somebody in them. And again, that may be just something we're going to have to get over as human beings, but we can understand why it is a concern that people have.
Yeah, there's no question that our children and grandchildren will be doing driverless cars. It's those of us who've been driving who have, I think, some concern. But by almost any number of studies have shown that even a couple of years ago, Google driverless cars already had half of the accident rates of human beings. I mean, people don't realize that 40,000 Americans are killed on the road every single year. And it's estimated that if you went to driverless cars, you would save 1 million lives each and every year just by reducing the number of accidents. Another added benefit is that you would actually increase the efficiency of the existing roadways. You could fit 3 times as many cars on the LBJ or the George Bush on any given day because of the sensors and the software that'd be on board. So there are all kinds of really wonderful reasons to go to driverless cars. And yet we don't want to, because we want our autonomy, we want our freedom. And I guess we want the right to be killed by drunk drivers and people falling asleep and people texting. The reality is the vast majority of car wrecks and fatal car wrecks are caused by what? Human, driver error.
Yeah.
By the way, there's a really interesting study I just read the other day. I laughed out loud. In all car wrecks, and one insurance company reported, in all the car wrecks of single person accidents, 38% of them blame somebody else, even though they're the only person in the car, and their car by itself ran into something.
Yeah. And
so that just tells you how fallible and problematic human drivers really are. And so that's why there's no question in my mind driverless cars are going to be here.
Yeah, again, human sinfulness there as well. If you'd like to join us, we've already starting to get some phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. But let me, before we take some calls, get into that, because one of the ethical questions about drone technology, again, it's just neutral, but can it be used for good or bad, is does it make it easier to push a button when I'm not there? And one of the movies I watched years ago called Eye in the Sky, really good question about whether or not when a drone flies over, we know there's a bad guy on the home. We could certainly send in some kind of SEAL team to take him out, but just pushing a button all the way back here in Florida or wherever that might be and bringing a missile to the house is an easier way to go. But again, there's almost always collateral damage. There are individuals killed that weren't maybe the bad guys, but I'm not there to see it, and maybe that makes it easier to maybe advance some of the aspects of technology that we wouldn't have advanced otherwise. What's your thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. Again, the idea that I don't have a pilot inside of an airplane that's crossing enemy airspace, that pilot can't be shot down, can't be captured, or heaven help us, be killed. So the idea that we're not putting pilots in harm's way, I think is a great idea. I love that. But having said that, there's something about warfare as an ultimately human exercise. And when you take humans out of the human exercise, what happens? And there's several things. One of which is there's a book called On Killing. Forgive me at the moment. I can't remember the author's name.
Dave Grossman.
Okay.
Yeah.
My father-in-law, whom I dearly love, 86 years old, combat wounded, Korean War, U.S. Marine, Sergeant, thank you very much. Fox Company, 5th Marines, I got to say that too. He gave me that book years ago. It's a fascinating read, and bottom line is human beings are wired not to hurt each other and not to kill.
That's right.
And so,
good book. I've got it on my shelf right over here.
Yeah. So some of the studies have said that during World War II, like the vast majority of
during Gettysburg, they just keep loading the gun, but they would never shoot it,
or shoot over their heads or whatnot. So there's something, and I think it's the Imago Dei, that there's something within us that recoils the thought of killing another human being. And when you're up close and personal and can see that person, you might resist, but if you don't see that person, they're thousands of miles away, it might be easier to push that button.
We're going to talk about some of the ethics of drone warfare. We're also going to continue talking about some of the Tom Clancy novels, the newest one coming out today, Line of Sight, written by Mike Maden in studio. And we already have a number of phone callers on the line, so we'll give them first choice. But if you'd like to join the conversation, you can also give us a call. That number is 1-800-351-1212. As we go to a break, you can go to the various links that take you to the Tom Clancy books and the Mike Maden books. All of them available at our website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation. In studio with us today, Mike Maden. If you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Have a link to MikeMaden.com. Again, a couple of different books about drones: Drone, Blue Warrior, Drone Command, Drone Threat. And so those books are already out. And then the good news is now the second of the Tom Clancy books by Mike Maden, First Point of Contact, and today coming out, Line of Sight. And for those of you in the Dallas area, if you want to go to the half-price books in Louisville, they'll have a chance to meet you face-to-face and get a book signed by you as well. So let me encourage people to do that. But if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let's take some phone calls. We'll head up to North Carolina first. Matthew, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hey, how are you doing, sir? How are you doing, Mike?
You're doing great, Matthew. How are you?
I'm hanging in there. I had a question. I'm a huge fan of yours. Been reading all the Troy Pierce novels since my brother turned me on to them, as well as the Tom Clancy novel. Little background about me: I was in the Marine Corps as well, and was in the intelligence field. And one of the questions I had is, from a standpoint of somebody in that kind of field, how do you see them reconciling as a Christian some things they may be required to do on a much more personal basis, one-on-one with, say, a prisoner, with their Christian beliefs? Having been in that environment, I know that at times I was torn when, I would be sitting there thinking, is this what God would have me do? But I knew that it was what I needed to do.
Well, you just raised all kinds of fascinating questions. First of all, my Marine Corps father-in-law would have me say, Semper Fi. Secondly, I would definitely say, yeah, hoorah, and I'd definitely say thank you for your service. You've raised some, terribly important questions. As you said, I think that you have to obey your own conscience and do what God would have you to do in whatever situation, whether in combat or not. There's a very strong pacifist tradition in Christianity, and people go down that path. Mm-hmm. But other people, such as yourself, that you swore an oath to, protect and defend the Constitution, to obey your superiors. You have to do that to the best of your ability and to the best of your conscience. And if there's some point at which you feel that God is telling you not to do something, then you need to not do it. But if you don't feel that restraint, then unfortunately, we put young men and women like you in harm's way and force you to make hard decisions like that. And that's why at the end of the day, it's not ultimately your responsibility in that situation. It's the government that puts you in that situation. And one of the struggles that I really have in a lot of the conversations we have is that politicians that send our young men and women off to war themselves don't bear the responsibility or the cost or the pain or the moral weight of those decisions, because they make the decisions for all kinds of reasons, usually not motivated by what's in the national interest or certainly in the interest of folks such as yourself.
Exactly. And sometimes it is those guys on the ground, the ones that are knee deep in it, that are faced with, like you said, those moral weights that they have to deal with for the rest of their lives. I know a friend of mine who won't even step into a church anymore because of some of the things that he did, and he feels like he's got too much on his hands to even step foot in a church. And to me, it's sad.
It is sad, and it's absolutely not true. And we need to pray for that brother, because there's nothing that can't be forgiven by God. And terrible things happen in war, and that's why we should avoid war at all costs. And if we're going to enter into a war, we should do it legally and in full conscience and according to principles like just war.
Yes.
And unfortunately, we're not doing that these days.
No, we're certainly not. Matthew,
yeah.
First of all, you've read some of the books, so it seems like you're a fan.
I'm a huge fan. Like I said, my brother turned me on to the first one, and after the first one, I bought it, the next one each time it came out. And the Point of Contact book, I've been a Clancy fan since I was 13 years old, I think, when Hunt for October came out. And it was probably reading those books, Cardinal of the Kremlin, Hunt for October, and stuff like that, that first grabbed my interest into going into the intelligence field in the Marine Corps.
Yeah, Tom Clancy was just a gift, wasn't he? I mean, an insurance salesman, but a genius. You know, I can get on the interwebs and play on Google and find out things. He's in the public library sifting through index cards and uncovering unbelievable things. He's a genius. He really was.
He actually also used to go to Quantico, Virginia a lot, where there was the Marine Corps intelligence activity. He hung around up in Quantico quite a bit.
Yeah, but again, there were people that wondered how he had access to some of that information that was supposedly top. And even really from Hunt for a Red October, is like, how did he know all of that about submarine technology and all of the rest? I mean, they're just, from the very first novel, he seemed to know same things that nobody else seemed to know. It was just fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, and
he's a very fascinating man.
He was. He's been quoted as saying that you can find all kinds of top secret stuff in the public library if you just know where to look.
It's just amazing. Well, Matthew, appreciate you calling today.
All right. Thank you very much. And thank you, Mike. And I look forward to this next book.
Matthew, thank you so much. I so appreciate the phone call. God bless.
Next book's out today. It's called Line of Sight, and that follows up on Point of Contact. And those are the Tom Clancy books. And, of course, we've been talking about the drone books. Are you ready for another phone call? Because we'll work our way through some of these calls here today.
You clearly have high-quality callers. If Matthew's any indication, yes, let's have another one.
Yeah, especially if they like your book. That's got to be good. They ought to be smart people if they like your book. Let's go to, we'll go to Maine this time, WSEW in Maine. Steve, thank you for joining us today. You're on with Mike Maden.
Hi, thank you. Hi, Mike. I just wanted to make a comment on, drone technology. It's used in warfare. I guess it's considered to be good as long as it's being used on our side and not on the other side.
Yeah, because it's going to be developed on the other side too, isn't it?
Well, yes. And that being said, one of the advantages we've had in wars with countries countries that would be considered superpowers, either they as our allies or in situations where we've been in Cold War situations with them, is that their soldiers oftentimes desert their own countries' military because things aren't so good in those countries. Now, if that country's leadership then has drone technology, well, guess what? There's not going to be any desertion. And it's going to be a totally different playing field. So, there's a lot to look at from our military's point of view. I'm sure there's great minds, that are discussing these types of things. Well, at least I would hope so. Anyways.
Well, first of all, Steve, hi. I'm so glad you called, and thank you for the questions. No, you're exactly right. The whole question of drones and military applications is fascinating from an American perspective. And there are any number of people in our country who are asking the question, how far should we go? Should we limit the technology? Should we limit the level of autonomy? I'm sure you are familiar with the discussions, but the question is, what will our enemies do? We're all scared. Elon Musk, among others, is scared to death of artificial intelligence and sort of Terminator kinds of robots. And so a number of scientists signed a document a few years ago saying we've got to stop automated warfare and automated drone warfare. But what if our enemies don't? Today, computers think so much faster than humans. I mean, about Watson beating every human player in Jeopardy. I don't know if you're familiar with AlphaGo and AlphaGo Zero. It's a whole other conversation, but the oldest continuously played board game is the game of Go. There are more possible moves in the game of Go than there are atoms in the known universe. It's simply not possible to program a computer to sort of memorize all the moves, and so that's why they knew it could never beat a human player. But in 2016 and through 2017, this artificial intelligence wound up beating human players to the point where now AlphaGo Zero cannot be beaten. In fact, AlphaGo Zero wound up beating the machine that beat the human 100-1. So the bottom line is, if the other side has an AlphaGo Zero general or admiral flying drone swarms at you, or drone fleets, or drone submarines, or drone missiles, do you want a whole level of bureaucrats and people in uniform and lawyers sitting around having conversations about what should we do next? And the answer is no. So automated drone warfare, in my mind, there's no question we're moving that direction.
That's fascinating. And again, you get into the issue of artificial intelligence, as you just mentioned a minute ago, certainly an important issue. One of the articles I've written about is privacy and surveillance, and I want to talk about that when we come back, because what about security? What about privacy? What about drones? Because some of us might be saying, well, I probably don't have a big military drone flying over my house, but I might have some other kinds of drones flying in my neighborhood, even into my backyard. What about that? So we'll talk about that with Mike Maden. And if you find yourself saying, oh, I've got to read some of these books, the good news is we have a link to those, not only a link to the Tom Clancy books, but also the Mike Maden books written before. All of it available at our website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break. We'll chat with him for a few more minutes right after these important messages.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. $3.25 million. That's the price one New Jersey town will pay for its religious discrimination. Not long ago on this program, I told you about the refusal of Bernards Township, New Jersey, to grant a building permit to the Islamic Society of Basking Ridge, New Jersey. The society fought City Hall for at least 4 years, having their application denied 9 separate times. In November 2016, the U.S. Department of Justice filed a suit against the township, alleging a violation of the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. The Department of Justice won just 2 months later. But by May 2017, the township decided to give up the fight, settle with the government, and allow the Islamic Society to build their mosque. This is good news for religious liberty. Though Bernards Township, in this case, used their zoning laws to prevent the building of a mosque, it could have just as easily been a synagogue, a church, a cathedral, or other house of worship. City governments cannot intentionally throw up permitting obstacles to religious organizations. They must treat a religious organization's application for land use just like it would any other land use application. In a land that values freedom, our government should never make the free exercise of religion difficult. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
More people today are saying Americans don't really need religion, but America does need religion. Religion helps the economy, families, and even national security. Learn more by reading Saving America, 10 Reasons Religious Freedom is the Key to Our Nation's Future. You can download this free booklet at firstliberty.org/Saving America. That's firstliberty.org/Saving America. Discover 10 ways religion benefits America at firstliberty.org/Saving America.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about privacy and surveillance. That's one of our booklets that we make available. And we even have a section here on kind of a biblical view on surveillance and privacy. We talk about FISA acts, and we can talk about drones and Big Brother. This is a conversation we've had before, Mike, and you thought about this as well, because after all, you've written a series of books dealing with drones. Whether it's military drones or just some kid in the neighborhood that decides to fly drones around and all of a sudden have kind of electronic peeping Tom, or whether it's drones that have helped us, as I talk about here, actually find the individuals that were responsible for the Boston Marathon bombing or whatever it might be. again, there are tools, but those tools can be used for good or bad, right?
That's exactly right. And again, the technology is neutral. It's really the people that are behind the technology. Can you trust them? I mean, trust is the basis of all politics and all markets. It's also the basis of technology. If you don't trust the people behind the technology, you've got a problem. I mean, on the one hand, surveillance is actually a pretty cool thing. If you've ever been driving down a busy road and there's some knucklehead is speeding past you and being dangerous, well, there's a policeman up ahead with a radar gun. What do they always do? They slow down. When bad guys are under surveillance, they tend to behave. So if bad guys are under surveillance 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we might get better behavior. And as you've already alluded to, you can solve virtually every crime in America, or at least the vast majority of them, especially the ones that aren't solved. Because if everything was under surveillance 24/7, whenever there's, like, say, a robbery at a local convenience store, we've seen this before, right? Some guy with a mask comes in, he robs the store, and he leaves. You got the grainy images inside the store, but you can't find them because that's all you have. But if you had everything under surveillance for 24 hours and had it taped, what can you do? You run the tape backwards, and you can follow this guy all the way back to where he lives. You can access either criminal databases or social media, and you can find out who he is, what his criminal record was, and have police, dispatched there within minutes of the crime. So it's a tremendous crime-fighting tool. It's a tremendous way to prevent crime. But having said that, you have something like Skynet. Yeah, it's from the Terminator movie, but strangely, the Chinese government itself has called their own system Skynet.
Skynet, isn't that funny?
There's 170 million closed-circuit television cameras in China, all linked together through a software program, facial recognition. They claim that they can do facial recognition on 1 billion people in 1 second. Now, what does that mean? That means they know who you are, where you are, what you're doing. And again, for the most part, my wife knows who I am and where I am, what I'm doing. I'm okay with that. But if it's a government or an agency or a criminal syndicate,
or the Antichrist,
or you name the bad guy, if they have under surveillance, now I'm concerned.
Yes.
And so that's the challenge.
That really is. And again, one of the things I say about this is when we talk about privacy, we have to recognize that the scriptures talk about the fact that we should be blameless and innocent in a crooked and perverse generation, that it tells us that an elder should be above reproach. I'm a deacon. I'm going to be doing hospital visitation after the program here today. So we recognize that certainly living your life above reproach is good, but sometimes people don't understand privacy versus secrecy. I mean, certainly I don't have that much I want to keep necessarily from people knowing, but they don't need to know everything about every aspect of my life. And so that's the difficulty when you start, as you have in China, having the government being able to track you 24/7, because all the cameras and all the facial recognition can track you even into the men's room and some other places where you'd kind of like to have some privacy.
Well, I agree with that. And also, records can be doctored, images can be photoshopped.
That's another point of it,
Yeah, and so the whole question of what is actually real. And again, when you talk about communist China, it's easy to say, oh, yeah, I don't want that. But think of your least favorite politician. I will not name any names. Imagine them having access to, and the current controversy brewing with the FBI and the CIA to be generous. Maybe some rogue elements, or
and
maybe not.
FISA warrants that we talk about here.
Exactly.
Yeah,
But imagine using government resources to try to change the outcome of an election. That you're trying to destroy political opponents, or the Lois Lerner scandal in the IRS using that office. I mean, there's a reason why the founding fathers were very skeptical of government, right?
Yes.
Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And what's more powerful than having total informational awareness?
Yeah. It's big data and dark data and all that kind of issue.
Absolutely.
We're just about out of time, and I thought for some of my Tom Clancy listeners out there, they're saying, okay, the movie's probably going to come out in a few years, but the book is out in line of sight. Can you, in the next few minutes, just give us a little bit of an overview of what our Tom Clancy aficionados are going to get when they go out and buy this book, which I suspect they're going to do right after the show is over. So talk about what's in line of sight.
Well, you have a wonderful audience, so I'm sure they will. The Tom Line of Sight is part of the Jack Jr. series. He's the son of Senior, the president.
And by the way, these are shorter. They are a little more readable than these 1,000-page tomes that used to come out, right?
Yeah, they're 100,000 words, so it's still a good read.
It's still a good read.
A good doorstop, but not as quite as large.
Not
as
as large. Yes.
But I had a complaint the other day that wasn't long enough, so that's good. Yeah. But bottom line, this particular story, as a favor to his mother, Dr. Kathy Ryan, who is a world famous eye surgeon. Jack Jr. agrees to fly to the historic city of Sarajevo to search for a former patient of hers, a little Bosnian girl, a Muslim girl actually, who was wounded in the horrific Bosnian Civil War. Well, when he gets there, what he discovers is that the region is on the verge of yet another horrific ethnic holocaust. And with Russian Spetsnaz forces swarming across the border from Serbia and ruthless syndicate assassins hot on his heels, Jack Jr. alone fights to save a now young woman in a race against a fiery clock that threatens to ignite the world in the next World War.
Yes. And again, you have to do some research on Bosnia, Herzegovina, Croatia. You have to think about how those all came together, know a little bit about the history of the previous warfare, the kind of technology. So there's a lot of background research you have to do in order to write one of these, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And for those of us who are a little older, we do remember some of the images from those days. I mean, the Bosnian Civil War was a nightmare. The Yugoslav wars happened during the 1990s after the death of Tito and the breakup of the country. There are 3 ethnic divisions in that part of the world, especially the Serbs, who are Orthodox, the Croats, who are Roman Catholic, and the Bosniaks, who are Muslim. The Balkans are that part of the world where civilizations have clashed for millennia, from the ancient Romans to the Turks to the Soviet communists. But because of all those civilizations sort of colliding there, these ethnic divisions also exist, and those folks have warred against each other across borders and within civil wars for decades. The Yugoslav wars were horrible. 100,000 people or more died, most of those civilians. And where? Not in the steaming jungles of Southeast Asia, but right in the heart of Central Europe.
Right.
And the sad part was the Bosnian Civil War was so horrific, the worst of those wars, that we used the term ethnic cleansing.
Yes.
By the way, when we think of Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, we think of 9/11, appropriately so, because we were attacked. But almost a decade earlier, Osama bin Laden first launched jihad against the West in the Bosnian Civil War. And by the way, drones were first used in combat, not in Iraq, not Afghanistan, but in the Bosnian Civil War.
That's right. Sarajevo at one time, the location of this wonderful Olympics, and then it was just a disaster after the war.
1984, it's where international peace and cooperation, all the symbols of the Olympics are there. 8 years later, it's a killing field, surrounded in a circle of steel and fire by Serbs, killing and starving thousands of civilians, and NATO and the U.S. and the EU and the UN staying idly by. A horrific tragedy, a horrific mistake, and a perfect scenario set up for the Line of Sight story.
So again, Line of Sight out today. It is part of the Tom Clancy series that Mike Maden has written. And then, of course, don't forget the previous books, Drone, Blue Warrior, Drone Command, Drone Threat. And Mike, it's just been great to have you in studio. Let's do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Been a fast hour, hasn't it? And we haven't covered all the issues yet. But again, I hope you'll take the time to go to our website. We have links to these books, links to both of our guests over the last 2 hours, the authors, and I hope that you'll take the time to take advantage of those. And as you go there, I hope you'll also recognize that we're coming to the end of our fiscal year here in June. So if you can help us out financially with a gift, we'd greatly appreciate it. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. See you back here tomorrow.
The young man burst into tears. He was in obvious distress, but thankfully, Don Blythe had the exact answers he needed. God took a chance encounter in a restaurant bathroom of all places and turned it into a divine appointment that forever impacted a young couple and saved the life of their unborn child. Don was able to help because he was prepared. And where does Don Blythe get some of the information and resources he needs to be ready for the next opportunity? He listens to Point of View. He listens because others like you took action. This is your opportunity to help equip people to be ready. And because of a special matching challenge, your gift here in June will have double the impact. You can be part of some amazing transformations, and it all starts with a simple phone call, 1-800-347-5151, or by clicking into pointofview.net. One day, you are going to make a difference. That future is now. 1-800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.